private sector will be given a level playing field in building satellite launches and other space-based services as the government decided to open up the space sector. Private sector firms are also expected to play a big role in future projects for planetary exploration and outer space travel. Union Minister Jitendra Singh said private players would be allowed to use Indian Space Research Organization's facilities and other relevant assets to improve their capabilities. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the opening up of the space sector. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, scientist, NASA, G. Madhavan Nair, former chairman, ISRO, and Ratan Srivastav, advisor, Space FICCI. All right, then, Dr. Nair, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first understand your thoughts and your views about private players being allowed to use ISRO's facilities and to collaborate further with the space agency.
Well, it's quite a welcome policy decision which the government has made, but that doesn't mean ISRO has not engaging the private partners in its role. Maybe starting from Dr. Kalam's time when he was making the first SLV3 onwards, it is industrial participation we have ensured. And today, ISRO's budget, nearly 60% is spent through the industries. There are nearly 150 industries in the country who are carrying out various tasks for the space. That's actually quite a big achievement. But at the same time, I must admit that we are yet to make an impact. Some of the industrial houses coming forward to take on a total system realization, like a launcher or a satellite, and taking the whole responsibility for providing services and so on. It is all the time ISRO has been holding hands, and I can say that it has been a tremendous success in the past. Now, this policy guideline, yes, certainly it is a reiteration of what we have been doing, but at the same time, we have to be aware of certain limitations. The private sector is not enthused because the investment required in this field is very large and the returns are low. So with the result, very few people venture to come forward to take on the total responsibility. Then there is other risk of failure. In case something goes wrong, who is going to pay for it? Then third, of course, is the international liability. When we have a space object, we have to honor the international treaties and so on. So putting all this together, we should have a clearly defined space policy based on which these private players can be encouraged to carry out more and more space business in the country.
Okay, all right. Amitabh Ghosh, what are the emerging opportunities really as far as the private sector is concerned in space?
See, the opportunities are huge, and I can say that ISRO has a huge mandate and it's an ever-increasing mandate. And if you think about the US, I'll talk a little bit about the US and you'll get a sense also about this public-private partnership model. So imagine the shuttle had just retired and NASA had to build a replacement to the shuttle. So what it really did, it invested. So normally, as Dr. Nair was just saying, that the space agency handholds the commercial contractor and works him through the development process, which happened with the space shuttle. So in 2009, NASA did something quite the contrary. They told two companies to independently develop the shuttle. One of a shuttle replacement. One of them never had done this before, which is SpaceX. And they just pumped up $3 to $4 billion and a time frame of 10 years. And at the end, what you saw, I don't know whether you were observing the launch a couple of weeks back, SpaceX could actually deliver. And it's a very different model. SpaceX owns the vehicle. NASA is just buying services. Similarly, NASA has another program where they will just buy lunar data from the moon. So a couple of players will buy services. So the players are completely responsible for sending the rover up, for everything else. NASA just wants the data, and for that data, we'll pay $80 million. So it shows how far privatization can be taken. And I think the crux of this is how can you make it attractive to the private sector? And that is where the risk sharing comes. That is where it is very delicate. What is it that you can make a change in the regulations that will make a very big business house from India or a few business houses and say, well, this is the next opportunity, and this is where we need to go, and we can actually transparently get a return on our investment. Until that is realized, the private sector will just will be engaged. Of course, they'll do some work for the government, but they will never take a leading role, and they will never break free of the government regulation, the government delivery model. This is
Okay.
what I think.
Okay, all right. Ratan Srivastav, how will opening up of the space sector really help the private entities? Because this has been a clamor that the private entities have been, calling for a long time now. So what is it and how is it going to help?
So Frank, as Dr. Madhavan Nair just said, it is not this that the industry did not have access or it was not open to the private sector. The private sector was open to ISRO, and ISRO was outsourcing a lot of work to the private sector as well. And as you know, about 90% of the launch vehicle is made by the private sector. Now, the challenge here is this, that the private sector in India has been only an outsourced vendor to ISRO. I am repeating, it has been only an outsourced vendor which is using its manufacturing for providing the components and sub-assemblies that they want. They have not been able to even come up to the level of being a partner. When I say a partner, I also say that there would be some investment in the design, in the development, in the validation that they should be doing. They have not been doing so. The design and development is done by ISRO, and they are given to manufacture and give it back to them. Now, if they have to become partners, they have to become partners in the real sense that they should be allowed to do research and development. They should be allowed to do validation, qualification, and testing, and they should be also allowed to hold the IP. I mean, Amitav just spoke about the SpaceX and Boeing. So the IP is an issue that has been addressed in the United States, for example. Now, if this has to be done, then the question of opening of the facilities always comes up, because you cannot create the facilities for validation, qualification, and testing, as Dr. Nair just said, that the returns are low and the market has not yet panned out to the way it should. Therefore, the requirement of opening up the facilities of ISRO for the testing, validation, as well as for whatever needs to be done as far as the integration of the systems is concerned. Therefore, the whole ecosystem has to come into the play, and in this ecosystem, the private sector of India and the public sector of India, both, whether it is the HALs or the Larsen & Toubros or the Tatas of the world, or in the MSME, they all have a role to play. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. And the potential of the Indian space industry would never be able to realize, and we would not be able to meet the ambitious targets that we have set for ourselves. We have a shortfall in everything. We have a shortfall in DTH. We have a shortfall in communication systems. We have a shortfall in navigation. I mean, we need a humongous amount of data, for example. When I say data, I need broadband. The BharatNet, for example, is totally the backbone of BharatNet is broadband. Do we have that kind of facility available? We need the investment, not only from the public sector, but from the private sector, and the industry would only invest if there is, I would say, openness and a horizon in which the investment would get a return.
All right, let me take a couple of points forward with you, Dr. Nair. One, of course, is the SpaceX launch. Now, do you believe that the private sector in India can replicate what SpaceX or Boeing have done? I mean, do you believe that they have the wherewithal? And number two, of course, is what has our experience been in dealing with the private sector? You yourself mentioned in your opening remarks that it has happened before. So what has the experience been like?
Certainly, the SpaceX has been an excellent example how the private sector can deliver a total product. But as pointed out, it involved investment of few $billions, which the private sector was willing to do, and they carried forward. And also, they have absorbed the technologies from various aerospace industries in US, and the NASA was really doing the think tank portion and hand holding and so on. But at the same time, if you look at the Indian scenario, we have to go a long way. I am not a pessimist, but let me put across. India, there's a huge market for automobiles. How many Indian design developed automobiles are on the road? Why it is not happening? So here the basic problem is all this needs a full backing of R&D and then concurrent engineering. So these aspects needs large investment first of all. Second, there is a lead time involved in getting this. ISRO's example, quite often we end up with setting up the entire facilities, infrastructure in the industrial houses and giving the technology, and the industries become just only the operators who will deliver goods. But the success story is in the last 20 years, ISRO's manpower is 15,000 stable, whereas number of missions in the country has gone by tenfold. This has been achieved only because of the private industries in the country taking up at least part of the work. Now, another example which I can cite is I have headed a project on design, development, and realization of indigenous passenger aircraft. And the project report was submitted. It was a high-level committee with industrialists and the government officials and so on. And the government has cleared in 2011. And it was suggested these private players should bring in the investment as well as make sure that the development is taking place and so on. And there was a 6-year program. But even today, we are not moved an inch forward on that. The money involved is not very big. At that time, I see in 2010 timeframe, it was hardly 6,000 crores. It was peanuts for a country like ours. But nobody was bold enough to come and invest that kind of money. The basic technology was available with NIL. The manufacturing capability was available with HAL. And DRDO and ISRO has got a capability to support in terms of instrumentation, navigation, and system design, and so on. So in spite of that, it has not taken place. So where do we stand? But we have examples where private sector has really done well. You take the field of space-based communication. The satellite part alone is being met by the ISRO facilities, and we put up a large number of satellites. Yes, there has been a shortage of the transponders in the past, but ISRO has taken a bold step to fill this gap. Today, I can tell you, nearly a dozen transponders of high bandwidth are lying idle in our skies. There is no takers. The matching ground infrastructure and the software which is required for is yet to come in. I recall the case of DTH. We have conceived a satellite in 2000 and 2004 was the launch of that. Only after that, Tata Sky, the first, and the CPV, they came forward to establish the ground infrastructure and so on. So there is a lag before the industry takes on. In the real market, if you look at it, there is not big money involved in the launchers or building satellite. The real money is in the services which is provided based on the space systems,
right?
Whether it's communication, earth observation, and so on. So that is where industry has got a very good opportunity, and the investment also is not quite large as in the hardware sector.
Okay, all right. So Amitabh Ghosh, has the SpaceX launch that we witnessed on May 30th, of course, it was a historic moment. Now, has that started a new era in human space exploration?
Absolutely, it has. So, to give you an example, a flight to Mars would have costed $500 billion by most estimates. And Elon Musk's new Starship, they have a model where they will sell 400 seats to go to Mars, and the price per seat would be just $200,000, which is very modest compared to space standards. It's probably less than 3 crores. So I think what the space sector here has taught the government and everybody else, and I'll give you an example. So, one of the launchers of the Falcon 9 used to fall in the sea and get destroyed. And Elon Musk came in and said, well, that is $30 million falling into the sea and getting destroyed. If you went to a city and said $30 million is coming down from the sky, wouldn't people try to recover that thing? And this is how the private players think. So what he right now he has a drone ship in the sea, and the Falcon 9, after it's expended, it falls into that drone ship and is used again. And this has caused the cost of launch to go down. Falcon 9 is very cheap right now. It's cheaper than NASA buying seats on the Soyuz Russian craft by a factor of half. So I think what the space sector and the creative race between Blue Origin and SpaceX has shown in the US is that if the space sector competes, costs go down, and you can do much more with the same amount of money, and which is a very good problem to have. So I think it has opened up a huge frontier here where NASA will likely be able to go back to the moon at a modest cost, and even some of the more speculative things like a Mars journey or a moon base, which Jeff Bezos want to do, they might also become plausible in the next 10 years.
Okay, all right. So taking the discussion forward now, Ratan Srivastava, space is considered to be, a strategic and a sensitive sector. Is that a factor while opening up to the private players?
I would put in a counter question. As you know, ISRO is yet to open its facilities to the private sector for testing, validation, qualification, research, whatnot. But the defense has already done so, right? So, and defense is supposed to be the most sensitive sector. So, if defense has opened up its facilities to the private sector, I would assume that there should not be much of a problem in the commercial arena where the space industry is involved. When I say commercial arena, I say, let's say, satellites for communication. Satellites for communication is something that we really need a huge amount of investment if we have to realize the potential of BharatNet, which is key to the Digital India program. Now, that kind of investment, the kind of satellites we need to be putting up every year, that requires investment, and investment can come from the industry. And as Amitabh just said, when you get the private sector investment, the cost reduces. At the end of the day, cost reduces, and you get a more efficient return on capital. So I think saying that it is a strategic sector is a very wide brush. But if we were to say that we could open the sector to communication satellites, we could open the sector for broadband, we could open the sector for DTH, we could open the sector even for applications, which is again a huge industry. Dr. Madhavan Nair would agree with me that applications is a huge industry. And if we can give access to the startups in India, and startups are the heart of the space industry services sector in India, and the startups can be given access to the that ISRO has, and like Amitabh said, NASA just pays for the data, right? So if we have that data with us, and that data can be shared, and which is not sensitive data, Earth observation satellites for weather, for agriculture, for marine life, for coastal, so much data can be shared, and it can be it can lead to the startup industry benefiting, as well as the sector really growing exponentially, because startups are hungry and they are innovators. This kind of experiment, you would know, and Dr. Nair would definitely know, has already been done by CSIR, right? So, they are innovators, and if they could be co-travelers in the journey of ISRO, I think we need to open this. And of course, we need to understand that there would be strategic sectors. Surveillance, for example, is one. Defense satellites, military applications, they are another. That, of course, should and always be in the spectrum of the government. I mean, the government means it could be ISRO, it could be Defense Space Research Agency, which has come up now.
Right, I can see you putting up your hand there, Amitabh Ghosh. Go ahead, please. You wanted to make a point.
So I had a tiny point to make. So I do understand the legacy issues, but I think we are also dealing with a new India. So as Dr. Nair said, that how many things are being designed in India right now? So that's a very valid point. How much of the creative research and development? And I've been watching the landscape for the last couple of decades, and I would say that there is a huge change in that landscape. So Tatas are making some design. They have some top design personnel at Pune. If you look at Mukesh Ambani's firm, they have done absolutely amazing. Some of the things are world class, and there are other companies which are so the landscape has changed a little bit, that you do have more and more cutting edge work coming in India, which is, I'm not saying that it's equal to the US or equal to the West, but you do see those green shoots coming out. Together with the desire of the private sector. See, the guy who started SpaceX probably had as much money as this Flipkart founders had. And he just went, and he had no capability, zero capability. He started this from scratch. No testing facilities, no research labs, no personnel. Nobody would want to work for SpaceX. I had friends who got offers, didn't join. But that is the company which did this. So it is possible, because the space sector has a way. It can bring in cost savings. It can bring in refreshing new technology. It can help rethink some of the problems. So there are some broad overarching reasons to go this way. And of course, as Rahul keeps saying, that there will be lot of regulations that need to be loosened up. Maybe some attitudes need to be changed. But overall, if you want more out of the present budget, this is one way to go.
Okay, all right. And it's Ratan. I'm coming back. Dr. Nair, on this issue of space being organization or an agency like ISRO.
Well, I think this is a very, very sensitive point, and we have to give careful attention to the details. The space systems are of dual use nature. It can be used for the civilian use as well as for the military potential. Now, to cite the example, ISRO started working with the development of these systems entirely for peaceful application in the civilian sector. But later, when the need came, some of those technologies were transferred to defense and all those things, and we are meeting all those requirements. But when it comes to the sensitive systems, first of all, the rockets itself, the type of launcher vehicles we are having today, you just change that payload, it becomes an ICBM. So would you like to have that technology open in the private sector? Especially in India, there is no safeguard and security for the IPR and the type of knowledge which is embedded into this. Second, as it was pointed out, that the space systems for the observation and telecommunication, vital communication, etc., that has to be with the government only, and I don't think we can just let it open up. Now, today, if we look at why this sector is not booming, so to say, is because of certain constraints we have put ourselves way back in 2000, maybe 20 years back. Some of them are really outdated. It needs to be reviewed and fixed. See, for example, the Earth observation data, it is available commercially from outside. but the Indian satellite data cannot be shared because of the constraints, because of the policies which have evolved long back. Similarly, in the communication area, the constraint is not coming from ISRO. ISRO builds the satellites anticipating future needs and trying to see how the low-cost solutions can be brought out and so on. But the regulatory authority is the Department of Telecommunication, Ministry of Broadcasting, and the Defense, and so on. Unless all those agencies clear, nobody can set up a total system here. And of course, the sensitivity is when you have the vital resource like a space communication, which can reach out to every nook and corner of the thing, who will have the control and authority over that? That's a question mark. The entertainment, the data transfer, the internet, etc. Yes, they are just open and can be provided. So we have to be selective in choosing such areas. And first, I will say the space exploration or space research policy has to be spelled out, taking into account the present experience and the aspirations of the industry. Second, there has to be legal framework, which will ensure that will be binding and private players will not part with the knowledge. Especially, there's a danger of some of these falling into the wrong hands, like terrorists. So this kind of tight regulation is required in the technology transfer and technology utilization. Once that is in place, we can go full steam in the type of suggestions which is made. I must clarify here, ISRO has never stood on the way of industry coming in. They are always encouraged, but unless we take a holistic approach of having the right policy, right legal framework, and that also we should comply with the space treaties where we are a member of that. So that's the process which has to evolve. And I don't think it can happen overnight. Maybe in the next couple of years, we may be able to evolve. But this misconcept about ISRO not supporting, I will not agree, because a small startup team wanted to send a rover to the moon as a competitive program. ISRO set aside its satellite from the thermovac chamber and brought in the startup companies and put that. Similarly, small satellite launches. We are offering free launches for the universities and the research institutes in the country. So there is nothing which ISRO is putting a block on.
Okay, all right. And Ratan, go ahead. You can have the last say on the program. Close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Okay. See, I tend to agree somewhat with Dr. Madhavan Nair, what he's saying. With all due respect, sir, I would say, for example, the biggest problem in India is the absence of space law, right? So we have the Space Activities Bill, which is lying with the government for the last 3 odd years, and there's still not been tabled in the parliament. In the absence of a regulatory and a compliance framework, Dr. Madhavan Nair is absolutely correct in saying, how do we build safeguards into the system? Therefore, we need the space law in India first and foremost. Based upon that, we could build in the safeguards for protection of data as well as services and the activities which are strategic to us.
Okay, I have to call. I'm completely out of time on the program.